Okay, so my name is Branden Miller, Storytime, and the reason why I'm doing this talk is because uh, a lot of times at conferences, you only hear about the successes, the things that went right. Um, so for a while now, I've been teaching at Marshall University, and my students come up to me and they feel, sometimes like they're just not doing as good as they can. And so I always have to explain to them, especially whenever you're at conferences, you're really kind of watching a polished view, right? You're watching that couple of hours worth of polish in the hundreds of hours worth of failure. So a few years ago in HackerCon, I did a non-technical presentation on prepping. And so now whenever I get the chance, I try to do some non-technical presentations. And I usually do it, uh, you know, highlighting my own failures, just because, people typically come up to me afterwards and they say, number one, thanks for being honest. And number two, I can't believe you recovered from that. That was pretty dumb, but congratulations. So here I am, and welcome to Storytime. So I've already touched on this a little bit, but I'll go into a little bit, more in depth. So I am a Christian. I always say that up front. Um, uh, there are plenty of conversations we can have about that. I'll just leave that there for you. I'm also a husband and father. I've been married more than 25 years. My oldest daughter is 20, and she was at Morehead State, but due to COVID, she came back home, and I can't wait for Morehead State to start back up. Um, I'm also, I have three other kids, 20 years old, 17, 14, and 5. And yes, there's a significant gap there. Um, yeah, it pushed back my retirement a little bit, but I'm still happy. Speaking of retirement, I've already retired once, which is why I'm still happy. So I spent 20 years in the Navy as a cryptologic technician. Most of that was doing maintenance, and then some of that was doing network analysis in a intelligence analyst role, which was a pretty cool job that I had. It gave me the best of both worlds. I got to still remain technical, but also get a better understanding of specific targets, not as technology, but as the people that use them, which that was pretty fun. I am a project starter and rarely a project finisher. So if I was to take you downstairs in my garage, you would see half, completed projects everywhere, every surface of my garage. Usually the only projects I finish are some type of hardware hacking on my motorcycle. So I'm really into that lately, whether it be, adding of components, modding, or just building things myself that I would add to my motorcycle. I'm an adjunct instructor for Marshall University. I have been for this is my third semester. I started out teaching just a intro to open source intelligence course, and then now I teach, as well as that, a intro to Linux course. And then, most importantly, I'm a storyteller. I learned a long time ago, attending these conferences, that people remember the stories that you tell. Rarely do they remember the details. And whenever I started doing my own presentations, it seemed like everybody was asking me for my notes. I was having to manage, GitHub and my own blog and things of that nature, writing up, after conference, I call them after action reports because I was military, and things of that nature. So I decided to start switching. I slowly switched. I don't do very many technical presentations anymore. If I do, it's usually associated with hardware hacking. And more so, lately, I've been really focusing on my kids. So I love Secure West Virginia and HackerCon, because both my My 20-year-old daughter, who was then 14, they welcomed her as a presenter, and I really appreciate that. And it actually got to the point where at 15 years old, she spoke at ShmooCon. So as a dad, really hit me in the chest, right? So then I started, I focused on my second daughter. She's now 17. Neither one of them want to follow in my footsteps, but both of them love to tinker and do things like that. But anyway, and then my 14-year-old has pretty much told me to leave him alone. So I gotta figure out how I can get him speaking at a conference. And once again, shout out to now SecureWV for letting my second child, my other daughter, speak. So I really appreciate that. I'm always trying to push them, and this con is one of the best environments to nurture that. And thanks, big shout out for y'all. All right, so what are we here for? Once again, story time. I'm going to tell you about my career starting in high school and falling flat on my face before my even career started. And then we're gonna go all the way up to, I think, 2017 is where I stopped. But basically, each slide is going to give you some milestones, so some significant events or significant failures in my life, how I recovered from those, lessons learned. And then I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome because that led to a lot of my failures. One of two things. Earlier in my life, it was that I'm very type A, and back then, it just oozed from me. I mean, from every pore. And then as I got older, a little calmer, then I started with the imposter syndrome, and that led to some of my later failures. But like I said, I always like to talk about my failures in the hopes that you can actually pick something up and learn it from me. And I won't say so that you won't fail. The purpose of this talk is actually to help you understand that failure is necessary. It is a necessity in life. And what you need to do is, like I said, learn from it, do it again. I mean, people always say, learn from it the first time so you don't make that mistake over. No, because no failure is the same. The lesson may be the same, but what led up to the failure is completely different. And so my first milestone was in 1990. I was 17 years old. The 90s. If you lived through the 90s, in my opinion, it was great. So we had people like Green Day, right? They introduced their own brand of punk, and then you got to watch them traverse into the whole concept of they weren't actually punk, they became popular. So they were pop punk, which they hated, and that forced them more to the punk side, but whatever. We had the triplets were in their second year. They were actually starting to win, right? Dallas Cowboys, go Cowboys. Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Irvin. They went 7-9, I think, in 1990, and then after that they started winning, and that was exciting for me growing up in Texas. But mostly, I was a borderline genius, and I mean, I don't have the scores to support that, but in my mind, I was one of the smartest people I knew. I knew just about everything. Just ask me, and typical teenager, at least teenagers in my household. I was in the top 10% of my class. I was, because I was a Texas resident, top 10%, I was guaranteed a seat at any Texas State University, which in my mind, of course, right, because I'm so brilliant. And then, so I applied to Texas A&M computer science program, or actually at that time it was computer engineering program, and LSU, Penn State, Purdue, they all accepted me for their engineering schools. And the problem is my parents sat me down, my divorced parents, who were then living together again, weird. And they sat me down and explained just how poor we were, and the fact that neither one of them had paid taxes for a while, and they would greatly appreciate if I wouldn't fill out those federal forms that would actually put into context how much they actually made. And because of that, financial aid just wasn't an option for me. And for someone who had their entire life planned out, that was kind of a shocker. And so I immediately drove to my uncle's house, told me, "You were in the military, take me to some recruiters." And he was a Marine, and that was the first branch he talked me out of, was the Marine Corps. He talked me into the Navy or Air Force. Air Force office was closed. So that was my first failure, is the inability to read the opening hours of the business I was trying to go to. And so I joined the Navy. My lesson from this actually was control those things that you can control. Make a plan and work the plan. So I had this dream. I was one of those people that truly believed that you only have a plan A, because if you have a plan B, you're inviting failure. And like I said, now looking back on that, is an absolutely wrong mindset. If you go on the LinkedIn, you'll see this everywhere. Never have a plan B. Okay. I mean, it may work for you in your one instance. Plan B worked for me. Granted, it was a plan B on the fly. So that brings me to my second milestone. So we had such great movies as The Last Detail. This is one of my big influencers early in life. And if you've seen the movie, you're probably thinking your parents were idiots if this was what really set your mood for life. And looking back, yeah, that's a valid statement. They probably should have never let me watch that movie whenever it first came out. All right. So, but like we said, I just wanted to enlist. So I went to MEPS. I took the nuclear power school, or the nuclear power engineering test. And as I was being presented the test, the nuke that was actually handing the tests out, cautioned me about pursuing that rate, because in his sailor words, basically was, "It sucked. Don't do it." So I signed up to be an air traffic controller. Why? Don't know. It was available. I'm a part of the Top Gun generation, so I knew I couldn't fly planes because I was going to be enlisted. So hey, air traffic controller. The problem was they signed me up to go to boot camp in January. Now, if you recall from my first milestone, I was still in high school and I wasn't going to graduate until May. So I had to get back on the bus, head back to Houston, and pick a different job. So my solution was they handed me a sheet that had all the careers on it, and I saw two things. Number one was that the school was 8 months in Pensacola, Florida, which I'd been to before, and I loved the beach there, and then mostly worked in air-conditioned spaces. So whenever I say I fell into security, I literally, just by the grace of God, was handed a piece of paper out of a stack, by the way. This one just happened to be on top. And that's how I picked to be a Navy cryptologist. I knew nothing about it. Yeah. So my lesson here is sometimes your plan just sucks. Have a backup plan. This was my, the second time learning this in just a couple of months. And we're actually going to talk about that later. I'm going to come back to that. So I joined as a U.S. Navy cryptologic technician, and my focus was going to be on maintenance. All I knew at that time, like I said, Pensacola, Florida, mostly works in air-conditioned spaces, and that I was going to get a security clearance. That's really it. That brings us, to the middle the middle of 1991, all the way up through 1992, because that was just a long string of failures in my life, and once again, I survived. So what we had going for us at that time, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was putting out some of the best comedy genius on TV at the time. We had the Gulf War had kicked off in 1991. Interesting story. My brother was actually on his way to deployment. He was a tanker in the 4th Infantry Division, and he got what was his first DUI. So instead, they sent him to Fort Irwin, California, which, if you look, is one of the hottest places in America. And he actually helped train the Mississippi National Guard, who never deployed. So he was one of two people out of almost 1,000 in his unit that never actually deployed. So if you look at this picture, this is my graduation picture from my what they call a Class A school, or your basic school. It was 8 months. What you'll notice, though, is I'm actually not in this picture. And that leads me to my next failure. So I literally almost flunked out of this Navy school, which if when you join the Navy and you have what's called a rating or a career field, if you flunk out of that school, they usually send you out to the fleet undesignated. What that means is you're the lowest of low. You do basically whatever you're told. You usually work deck division, which is painting and scraping and, doing all that kind of stuff. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just going to draw your attention back to the mostly works in air-conditioned spaces is what brought me to this field. So a special shout-out to a man named Terry Chimsky. Ski actually helped me through the module that I failed more than once called special circuits. And if you know anything about JK flip-flops or logical functions, I just couldn't do it. So I was 17 of 17 once I actually graduated from my class. And then I went on to an advanced school. For some reason, the Navy decided to give me an advanced school right out of the gate. There, during the first half of the course, I was number 5 of 6. And the second half of the course, I was 6 of 6. So I'll just say that my priorities weren't necessarily in the right place, right order. My lesson from this is always trudge forward. Make deliberate baby steps. If I was to look at the complete big picture during this year of my life, it would have sucked. But because I really focused day to day, this is what I have to do tomorrow to stay in school. This is what I have to do tomorrow to stay in school. That's what actually helped me get through this time. 1994 is my next biggest failure. What we had going here was TLC. I mean, come on. If you were alive in 1994, TLC was where it's at. But my problem was, at this point, after my advanced school, I was on submarines, and I was doing maintenance. We would bring our equipment on. We would fabricate the materials that would hold it in place. We would install it. We would maintain it. I was really good at that. I was still an idiot who was 20 years old and had problems with the other parts of my life, such as I was late a lot. So I almost actually was arrested under UCMJ Article 87. And I still remember what this. UCMJ is the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and it's basically the legal or the laws above and beyond our federal and state laws that govern U.S. military. And missing movement literally means to jump from a vessel or miss the deployment of the vessel. Any person subject to this chapter who, through the neglect or design, misses the movement of a ship, aircraft, or unit which the person is required in the course of duty to move, shall be punished as a courts-martial may direct. I still remember the language of that because of all the dumb things I had done before and all the failures I'd had before. This was really the one that really had me, it was a wake-up moment. And the reason for that is because you could get a dishonorable discharge. You could get confinement for up to 2 years and loss of pay for that whole time you're confined. Luckily, I had a commanding officer who had actually missed ship's movement as a young sailor. He had, I think at that time, 26 years in. He dismissed all the charges, which everyone, and it was a closed door session that we had, meaning that it wasn't public. The only outcome that was made public was I was going to have to deploy on that same ship for 90 days. So what I learned from this is you can you can pretty much survive almost anything for 90 days. Because I'll tell you, once I got on that ship, I understand why, I thought he was lenient, but that was probably the biggest punishment I've ever had because I really had to grow up. And basically, I had 112 people, I think, on that submarine who were all relying on me for deployment, and I screwed that up for them. So that was a big one. So more on that later, because even though I learned a lesson, didn't necessarily learn how to apply the lesson. All right, next milestone, 1999. I mean, the highlight of this, Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. Hello. This was right before they both went absolutely nuts. And Fight Club was ruling the theaters, one of my favorite movies. Fight Club and Less Than Zero, favorite movies. And then we had this little thing called Y2K that we had to work with. At that time, I was doing long-haul communications for the Navy. I was stationed in Suitland, Maryland, and we were responsible for well over 500 circuits. I'm talking everything from satellite dial-up, which was like 9.6 baud, all the way up to, I said baud, not kilobits per second, but just 9.6 baud. We had several T1s, which at that time was 1.544 megabits per second. So we're starting to get to some modern day speeds. And then we had a single OC48 pipe, which I think was 2.5 gigabits per second. So we had, like I said, well over 500 circuits. Y2K was coming. There was a lot that we had to do. If you weren't around for Y2K, we were told anything from the lights would flicker to airplanes are going to fall out of the sky was going to happen. It was really, depending on who you listened to, it was either going to be nothing or the end of the world. So we were making preparations for this. I specifically was told, because I was a team leader at that time, I had 6 maintenance people working for me. And what we were supposed to do was shut down all non-essential equipment and then shut down the breakers for all of those racks in the communication center. It was easy. We had multiple panels. They were color-coded. If it was red, it was emergency. In other words, those had to operate at all costs. If it was gray or blue, then it was, not necessary equipment. So my boss told me to prove to him that everything was turned off that was non-essential. So after we had done the shutdown, opened all the breakers, he said, that's whenever he came in and said, all right, prove to me. So I walked over to the panels. These were huge panels in the communication center. She had to use 2 hands to throw that main breaker. So I throw the breaker, pop. Go to the second one, throw the breaker, pop. Go to the third one, throw the breaker, pop. Hey, what happened to our Linux servers? The voice I didn't recognize. And the reason is because unbeknownst to me, so we were a secure area, secured from the rest of the building. That was a secure area. And then they had carved out space from our secure area to set up another communication center. That communication center was so secure that whenever they installed all their equipment, they didn't want labels on our breakers to give a clue what they did. So they removed the labels. Not only that, our emergency panel, the one that had to stay up at all times, it was full. So they went to one of our non-essential or non-emergency panels, wired in their circuits, took the label off, and whenever I threw that breaker, all 105 Unix and other types of servers crashed. So what I learned from this is always approach your procedural documents as incomplete or flawed. We're humans. We're the ones tasked with keeping up with procedure and policy and things of those nature. Sometimes they just get left behind, not updated. So also, I learned that Unix servers are really hard to recover from a shutdown, and always provide UPS support for your servers. All right. On top of that, I also learned that you can do anything for 90 days, because that's about how long it took us to completely recover from shutting down the other communication center. That was fun. All right, so my next milestone was 2002. At this time, I mean, Nickelback was absolutely killing it. And if you're laughing about Nickelback, you should know that they are on the top 5 album seller list of all time. So go look it up if you don't believe me. They rock. I tried to say that with a straight face. Some of their music I do like. The other thing, hey, Leonardo DiCaprio, he could actually grow a beard at this point in his life, or at least the makings of a beard. And then this is also where I learned my alter ego. It was Sally Mae. So at this time, I actually was stationed at a Royal Air Force Base in Digby, England. Lincolnshire was the county. And so because of my role there, once again, I'd gone from a communication center with over 500 circuits. The communication center at Digby for the U.S. Navy was 2 circuits and a spare, so 3 total. So I had a lot of idle time on my hands, and what the military is really good at doing is making sure that you have no idle time. So in addition to being the communications guy, they actually made me the system administrator for our network. And yeah, but the first thing I'm going to tell you, my first failure here, other than my choice of wardrobe, was the fact that the U.S. military uses a lot of hardware encryption devices. And in doing so, they have to share pre-shared keys. For this particular encryption that we were using, the pre-shared key came in a plastic canister, and it was paper tape that had been, holes punched in it. And it was an optical reader that you would pull it through. You would load it into the reader, then you would load it into the crypto device. You would do what we call a bump, which means you simply interrupt the circuit for a second, and then as long as the other end had loaded theirs within a certain window, it would just come back up and things were good. The problem is if you're not paying attention whenever you're pulling that paper out, you get to a perforated edge. That's supposed to be a tear edge. I was cutting up, carrying on like I normally do. So I'm just pulling tape, and I pulled past that mark. Well, you can't push back in. So if you pull past that mark where you can read the first character of the title of that next strip, that's called a double pull, and you have to fill out a lot of paperwork. Now, interestingly enough, because of in the early 90s, we had a former sailor that actually was selling a lot of crypto, the pull tape, to the Soviets at the time. We had something called two-person integrity. And the fact that I pulled this tape further was actually more of an issue than missing ships movement previously. So there was an investigation to that, to make sure I wasn't trying to sell this crypto tape to the Russians. And once I was cleared, they actually, it was a non-issue. But yeah, that was 3 months of my life that I wish I could have gotten back. So what I learned from this basically is attention to detail. It's fundamental. I mean, there's 90% of our life, you don't have to be paying attention. Your brain is going to, do things on its own. But man, that other 10% is truly important. So make sure you figure out, especially within security, what that 10% is. All right. Next milestone, 2003. So the next year, basically I was still in England, and once I got cleared, then the Navy allowed me to reenlist because I actually had reenlistment paperwork put in. So we made a little jaunt down to London, and I was allowed to reenlist. But this gets me back into my next story. So, like I said, I was also the system administrator because I knew nothing about Active Directory. I was a network guy and a communications guy, but they wanted me to maintain the primary domain controller and the backup domain controller. And whenever we got back from this trip, actually, this was the people in this picture were literally about 75% of the people that were in our command. I think we left like 4 people back just to stand the watch. But no, whenever we got back, immediately I was approached and I was told that our primary domain controller had failed, and it was a hardware failure, and I needed to promote the backup domain controller. And you got to remember, this is pre-Active Directory. If you know anything about Active Directory, you have some well-established peering that happens. One goes down, the other one takes the load, and you're good to go, right? You just fix the primary one or replace it, or not the primary, it's peer. Well, back in the day, you had to actually promote the backup domain controller. Everything went well. We had checklists in place. We had, practiced. The problem was, because we only had a primary and a domain and a backup, nobody ever wants to do a full function test. They don't want to say, yeah, sure, just shut down the primary. We'll stop operations. The business won't be affected too bad, and we'll go ahead and promote that backup. Even though that was actually in our procedures, we were supposed to do that annually. We had never done it because it always, the mission is too important, is what we kept saying. So what we discovered was our procedures for doing this primary, taking that offline and bringing up the backup, they were spot on. We had never properly tested our backups. We did monthly full backups, weekly backups, and actually the daily differentials. And for approximately 6 months leading up to this, we didn't know that we didn't have good tapes because we'd never tested them. Every one of them were either corrupted because we restored them off-site, someone else's facility, or they just weren't being written to. So, lesson here, you'll hear it in every military movie: train like you fight, check your backups periodically if you're doing backups, and practice. But more importantly, do a complete practice. Don't just go right up to the edge and say, that's good enough, we'll finish that last mile, if it happens. Because when that failure happens, you're not going to have that last mile nailed down. So yeah, that was a big one. That one hurt too. All right, 2005. So if you were paying attention in 2005, you basically knew everything there was to know about Destiny's Child, right? They were basically ruling everything. In England, where I was stationed, it was still a little bit different, but they were at least on the top 10. They had some weird Spaniards singing in English that, for some reason, were always number 2. But anyway, then if you're into rugby like I was at the time, and especially being stationed in England, they had the Six Nations tournament at that time, and they just steamrolled everyone. That was exciting to watch. I got to watch every game in England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. I watched one of the games in Ireland, and then obviously I watched the France game on TV. But I mean, these guys, it's the first time I'd ever seen the haka, and that's a picture of the haka right there, what they do, their war chant to get them hyped up before they just kick the crap out of everybody. And then I would show you a picture of me, but hey, at the same time, I actually had my hands on season tickets to see Manchester United, which never happens, especially for foreigners, unless you got big bucks. But I lucked into that. So if you don't know about Manchester United at the time, they were it. This is my boy, Ronaldo right there. You at least know about Ronaldo. The guy with his back to us, and by the way, I'm on the field right here taking this picture. They wouldn't let me get closer, but they let me take the picture. Gabriel Henze, I mean, the dude was phenomenal defender out of Argentina. And we had Ruud van Nistelrooy at the time, Paul Scholes. I mean, it was just, they were killing it. At this time, this milestone wasn't a failure, but the Navy came out and they said, we don't need all these maintenance people. So we're going to create a new rate and we're going to call it N for, CTN for networks. And that's going to be different from like our IT personnel. The CTNs are actually going to be analysts, and they're not going to analyze our networks. They're going to analyze our adversaries' networks. So they actually retrained me. They sent me back to Pensacola, Florida for a 6-month course called Basic Digital Network Analysis. And it wasn't basic at all. So this was some very in-depth network engineering courses and intelligence analysis courses. So it was hard. Luckily, I had learned something from my previous failures, and I did pretty well in this class. Because I did well enough, as soon as I got to Fort Gordon, Georgia, which was my duty station, they picked me up for a follow-on course up at Fort Meade. So for 90 days, I actually went to a very intensive intelligence analyst course up there. And what you would do is they would give you a target. You would work this target for 90 days. And in order to graduate, you actually had to present your target package to a lot of the directors or the associate directors. There's only one director of NSA, but the associate directors, you had to do it with your cryptologic components. So I actually had a flag, an admiral come in for some of our presentations. And what they did was they gave you an honest assessment, either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether they would hire you for their organization based off of that 90 days of material. And we had probably a 20% failure rate. I was well on my way. Oh, and by the way, they would teach you a new concept, a new tool, a new technique, and then you would spend a couple of days applying that to your target. So we're talking really advanced material here, some really good coursework. 45 days in, I'll say that we had some geopolitical forces at work, and that led to my target being changed. So I had to then create a target package to graduate that I was going to brief in front of all these people with 45 days left. So that was something that I didn't think I was going to make it through. But my lesson there is teamwork. I mean, the military is always about teamwork, except in training environments usually. So whenever you're an intel analyst, they don't want you talking to other intel analysts until you graduate. And then all of a sudden they want to incorporate all this teamwork, right? Different than ground units. They typically want you to work right off the bat. But so the other thing that I learned is work-life balance can get skewed and it can suck. But once again, pulling back from that missing ships movement many years earlier, I realized that, you can do almost anything for 90 days. And in this case, 45 days. So that was one of the first times I truly started to understand my lessons and were able to apply them. All right, so next is 2006. This was a big milestone. It was a personal setback for me, very little to do with the military. I actually had a motorcycle wreck. So I woke up literally at the Medical College of Georgia about 7 days later, and they transferred me to the VA hospital. I was there for 4 months. I learned that morphine withdrawal is a real thing. It does make you itch, and I learned how to walk again. So that was a positive, but it sucked. Now, about 30 days after I got out of the VA hospital, I got this nice little breach notification from the federal government, and then I got one right after that from the VA saying, "Hey, sorry, your stuff was on the laptop, and it was stolen from the person that was put in charge of it on a train." So my lesson there is others have the keys to the kingdom, your kingdom. There's very little you can do about it, right? Especially after the fact. So that sucked. But once again, I'm going to do a time frame here from 2011 to 2014. I had a lot of little mini failures. I had retired from the Navy, which was good. I decided because of that whole VA incident that I would go to work in healthcare whenever I got out. Landed a great job in healthcare, and really the only thing I had during this time period was just a lot of really bad decisions about facial hair. So everything from beards to lamb chops to Fu Manchus and goatees and handlebar mustaches. But the biggest thing here is at the healthcare organization I was with, I was a senior security analyst. And one of the things my boss said was, you seem to be comfortable in front of people. You're now in charge of training. So that was basically a collateral duty that I was given. It wasn't part of my primary duties. But I really took it to heart, right? I really like the guys, one of my best friends, one of the best guys I've ever worked for. And I came up with this concept called Ask the Geek. So think, the Genius Bar, right? Only I was going to be the security genius within our healthcare organization. So I got a budget. I did presentations in the hospital. I did this booth called Ask the Geek. And I think the most number of people that I touched from 2011 to 2014 was like 7. I think I literally had conversations with 7 people, other than people in passing, picking up stuff and walking away. I tried to pass out gift cards, all kinds of stuff. They weren't having it. So my lesson here is passion does not necessarily translate into success. It can. It's a lot of time what motivates success, but it's not necessary. A couple of more milestones. 2015, I was a managing consultant for MSSP. I did a lot of charity work. I actually went over to Kenya, did some charity work there. I actually went over to Uganda by where Hackers for Charity was, and I worked with an organization called Soul Hope. And then, of course, I went to Jinja, Uganda, and myself and my family actually went and taught at the Hackers for Charity facility there, which is really inspiring. Problem was, just the week I got back, I was met with hey, here's a new hire, someone we hired while you were gone, and he's in charge of 2 payment card assessments, and they're going on concurrently, and not a big deal. I mean, the guy had 5 years of experience, had been doing this on his own. Because I didn't know him, I would check in often, right, show him the ropes. I sat in some of his interview sessions. Whenever it came down to the end, I kept telling him the whole time, make sure you're writing your reports as you go. We have a very strict time frame that we work with, and I didn't check all of his artifacts, nor did I monitor his reporting. And basically his work was absolute trash. The reports were turned into the client 2 weeks late. We ended up losing that client. And my lesson there was an oldie but goodie, Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. If you've never seen that speech he gave about the Soviet Union, I recommend it. The other thing I learned is I already had the knowledge, skills, and abilities to manage and lead. The U.S. Navy instilled that in me. We used a leadership model called the situational leadership model, basically 4 quadrants, how much monitoring should occur based on someone new to their job, new to the area, new to the command, or in this case, the business. And I didn't employ that. So make sure, reach back, do those things you've been taught to do, but are sometimes hard, right? Next big milestone, 2017. So a couple of years after this incident, we had actually got bought out by what I would call Globo Corp. It was a competitor to AT&T, very large organization. We were like their 30th security company in the world that they had purchased. And things weren't going so well. Ended up my new boss was very authoritarian type, hostile working environment, that kind of thing. So I jumped ship and I spent more time in Tampa than any human person should. I like Tampa, but not that much. When I wasn't in Tampa, and by the way, I live in Lexington, Kentucky, so this was all travel. I was with clients in Argentina and clients in India and Salt Lake City. Uh, so what went wrong here is it's a very small company, had a startup feel. It was very exciting at first, but that was for about a month. And then that's whenever I realized that the 50% travel they told me about was actually about 80% travel. There were unrealistic expectations placed on the employees, especially the consultants. And it's the only job that I ever actually feel that I just quit. I quit before my first year. So it was bad enough. It was the highest paying job I've ever had in my life. And it was bad enough that I turned down the 20% bonus that I was supposed to get in January. But I just said, enough's enough. And my lesson here is it's easier to find a job when you have a job, and always perform exhaustive research before you accept an offer. So this was the only time I ever actually looked at money, and it was definitely a mistake. So, but it did, speaking of mistakes, it did allow me to buy a lot of steak whenever I was in Argentina and make some good friends in India. All right, so that's kind of it about my failures. I've only got a couple of more slides left. But what I wanted to leave you with was two more concepts. Number one is what I call the four pillars of a career. So in order to have career success, these are kind of my wife calls them irreducible truths. These are the root cause for a good career. Number one, and I'm not saying you have to have all of them. I know some very successful people that were installing car stereos and are now very influential people in information security as pen testers are running organizations. So I'm not saying these are all a necessity. Just from my experience, the more of these you have, the easier it is, or the better jobs you can get. I've never had a gap in my career. I've always had at least one job, if not two, that overlapped. Even the day I quit. But the first one is education and training. It helps to have a degree. A lot of, especially corporate America, they want to see a degree, and that's usually one of their limiting factors for not giving an interview. The second one is experience. U.S. government is really good in that if they require a master's degree, but you have 15 years of experience, then you can come down to an associate's in some positions, and your experience is counted, as a part of the positive field. But yeah, experience, even without a degree or certifications, which is the next one, can get your foot in the door and give you a lot of opportunities. That brings us to the next one, certifications. So just like education, you don't have to have a certification, but it really helps. Once again, HR will block you from even getting an interview. A lot of times, just the way the job interview or the job requirements are written. And then the most important one probably is timing. So I've had some opportunities. I was going to get back into pen testing, and I hadn't done, I think the last time I did an actual paid pen test, I was using Backtrack. So that'll tell you how long ago that was. But anyway, all that to say, there were times where I had everything I needed for a position, but I was too late in applying for the position. And then there were times where I didn't have everything, these other three pillars, but I was at the right place at the right time and had the answers they were looking for. So that's key. Next to last slide. So we have, and this is kind of my be all end all. Beware those who are perfection. Whenever it comes to imposter syndrome, the thing that always hit me hard was usually the time period after coming back from a conference. And the reason why I say that is because I see these legends on, on a platform talking about their conquests. And what you never hear or rarely hear, because there are some people out there that are true rock stars that actually are going to give you the nitty gritty and all the failures. Dave Kennedy's one of the examples. For every success he talks about, he usually talks about a failure that he's had, or delays, or inability to get something to work, which is great. But yeah, that feeling that whatever we do is just not good enough, like I said, it can hit us hard. And I've actually turned down jobs, not because of the risk involved, because like I said, I'm a husband, I'm a father. That's my primary. I'm going to take care of my family first. But I've turned down jobs not because it was a threat to or a risk to that, but because I just felt like I was going to let someone down, and they're taking a chance on me. Why would they do that? I still suffer from that today. But what I discovered is like social networking apps, conferences, they give a false picture of what reality is. So as you're listening to some of these presenters, just realize that they're giving you 10 hours worth of work that summarizes hundreds of hours of failures at times. So keep that in mind. And then my takeaways for this are always reevaluate your plans, look inward, self-actualization, right? Nothing you see is reality. So if you go into it as a skeptic, but with eyes wide open, you'll learn a lot, and you'll be able to overcome some of your own fears and set your own standards. I mean, I could have submitted a technical presentation to this conference, but I didn't. And it's because I wasn't ready to do everything involved in presenting a technical topic this time. So I presented this, and they saw value in it, and I hope you saw value in it. And here I am. So I got to talk at a technical conference on a non-technical topic, and I hope it's done something for you. I practice this phrase often in my mind. Whenever I meet someone, I simply say, your opinion doesn't matter. And I say that over and over and over until I feel comfortable talking to that person. And just make sure you don't say it out loud. I've done that. I've slipped up a time or two. That's not a way to start a relationship. So that actually is all I have. I know there's like 5 minutes left. Hopefully I didn't bore you to tears. And I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody has questions.
Your opinion doesn't matter. That's funny. And you're right. Don't ever say that out loud.
Yeah, I've done it a time or two by accident, and man, it really puts a damper on things.
Well, I'll tell you, I suffer from imposter syndrome. That just, especially now that I'm, I've kind of doing a little job search on the side myself, and it's really scary. You start applying for these jobs, and you think, oh man, there's no way I can do this, but you just have to power through it. And what do you find helps you the most with that?
So Matt, I'll tell you that I have not applied to positions that I was fully qualified for because it's a new environment, and that scared me. But like I said, I actually go through these mental exercises now. The whole thing of your opinion doesn't matter, that's just one of the many things that I say to get myself prepared for new situations. And it's hilarious because as a youth, as a younger person, I didn't care. I mean, if you told me no, okay, law of percentages, I'm going to get a yes at some point, right? For some reason, now that I'm older and I don't want to say responsibilities, but, I feel this need to provide. I run into this a lot now. And it's actually been bad enough where I've had friends come to me and say, hey, I want to hire you. Can you start in 30 days? And my first response is no, because I'm going to fail you. And it takes them back sometimes. And it's just, it's one of those things where I haven't had to do it a lot, but like I said, I actually go, it's almost like doing a little chant to yourself. I've actually had to go into another environment and just do some positive reinforcement to myself. And that really helps. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes, and the less you have to go away. You can do that in the moment. So that's nice.
Who would you consider to be one of your, not I want to say role model, but maybe a mentor that has really helped you along in your career path?
Yeah, that's a good one. So Doug Fee worked. He was my boss whenever I got out of the Navy. He's the one that hired me, and that was one of those things where I look back now at the interview that I had with him, and I think, how did this guy ever hire me? Right? This was years after I did the job. Right. So I'm still dealing with some of those confidence issues. But yeah, Doug, one of the best things he told me is we got a new CEO that was a CTO that was a former nurse practitioner and had come up through that and took a couple of classes in IT, and she became the CTO. And what he said was, he came to me and he said, I'm concerned that you won't be able to grow here anymore. And so here's a list of people that I trust that I think you should call. And so I was like, Doug, why would you do this for me? And his response was, it wasn't about me. What he said was, I've taught you what I can so that you can apply it to information security here. If you take that knowledge and do good somewhere else, I'm happy. And I thought, wow, that's the first time I've ever heard that, right? In the military, especially, I had dealt with for years people that had rice bowls, and all they wanted to do was get rice out of your bowl and put it in theirs, right? They wanted to build kingdoms. And this is the first time I had met anyone. So I applied for a CISO position about 6 years ago, ended up turning down because of imposter syndrome. And he counseled me through that whole process. He was the one that actually got me to apply. So Doug Fee.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any questions in Discord. So Branden, we really appreciate you and your support of SecureWV over the years. I know this is probably your 7th or 8th time presenting, and hopefully next year we will see you in person.
Hey, someday I'm going to do another prepper one. Maybe next year if y'all accept it.
Absolutely.
That's still
Absolutely.
the best one I've ever done. I loved it.
Yeah.
All right. All right.